all officers from the department in relation to Outcome 5, Program 5.1, Digital Technologies and Communications Services. Okay, and we will start with Senator Hanson-Young. We will do 10-minute blocks, and we will be sticking to time today for all the reasons that the committee are well aware of.
Chair, I'm happy for you to go to the opposition first.
Senator Davey.
I also got told to come back in Outcome 5. Minister, can you give us an update as to where the Labor government's promise to legislate for content quotas on streaming services? The legislation was due to commence by the 1st of July 2024, and we are now in February 2025, and we are yet to see any legislation.
I think we've indicated publicly and in this forum that this is taking longer than we would have hoped, but the government is continuing to progress this work, and I'll ask officials to step you through where that's up to.
Thanks, Minister. Stephen Arnott, Deputy Secretary, Creative Economy and the Arts. Thanks, Senator, for your question. Yes, the Minister is correct. We continue to work on the government's policy. We continue to consult with stakeholders. We continue to refine a model for the regulation, but the government has not yet made a decision on the final policy.
So if I can just check the timeline, prior to the last election, Minister Burke promised that a Labor government would introduce SVOD, Australian content quotas for SVODs. Post-election, he declared the timeline of 1st July 2024. There was a draft consultation paper released towards the end of 2023 that any stakeholders were required to sign non-disclosure agreements to see. I understand further discussions went on between in early 2024, and the feedback I've had from stakeholders is it's all gone quiet since then. Given that so much work was going on, why has there been such a delay for something that other countries have brought in around the world? We've got content quotas in Canada, content quotas in France, and we are still waiting on Minister Burke's own deadline, been and gone. We're not hearing anything about it. Is there still a commitment to deliver content quotas post-election?
I can ask the officials to talk about the work that's ongoing. I'll refer you to my earlier answer. I mean, this is taking longer than we had hoped, but the government is committed to this course of action, and work is underway to develop the necessary arrangements.
Yeah, that's correct, Minister. Yeah.
Can I also ask, last year we saw commitments for the production offset rebate. Has legislation been drafted to facilitate that?
Senator, that's a matter for the Treasury, so they look after the Income Tax Assessment Act, and the timing of the legislation is a matter for them. So I'm not aware of where that's up to, but the government has made the commitments to make those changes. That's correct.
So that's a question that I should take to Treasury about the timelines?
That's correct.
Because I know there are producers out there who are waiting, and there's investment decisions that are on standby while we wait for this government to deliver on its promises.
Understand, yeah.
I have no further questions on that topic, but
Excellent. Okay. Senator Darman.
Senator, me?
No? Yeah. Do you have a question?
Okay, I do. I just wanted to talk about the Broadcast Resilience Program. So can you just outline what is the purpose of this program and what has been delivered, please?
Yes, Senator. Thanks for the question, and we'll just get some additional officials to the table to assist you with that. The program provides critical funding and services in support of the transmission of broadcasting, particularly with respect to the ABC, during natural disasters and other events. But I'll just ask if Ms Gannon or Ms Lopez would like to add to the answer.
Margaret Lopez, Assistant Secretary, Media, Industry and Sustainability. So the Broadcasting Resilience Program is providing $20 million over 3 years to improve the resilience of 98 ABC broadcast sites that are used for emergency broadcasting and are at greater risk of failure due to natural disasters. This includes emergency power backup batteries and upgraded satellite inputs for ABC, AM and FM radio sites across Australia. The BRP is also funding 5 mobile broadcast assets that can be transported to affected sites at short notice in the event that broadcast transmission fails. This includes during power outages caused by severe weather. The MBAs also serve as a power supply to charge essential devices and will be housed at 5 strategic locations across the country. This includes Bald Hills, Brisbane, which will serve south-eastern Queensland and north-eastern New South Wales, Gungahlin, Canberra, which will serve the Australian Capital Territory, southern New South Wales and eastern Victoria, Hammersley, Perth, serving Western Australia, Mount Bellenden, Kerr, northern Queensland, serving northern Queensland and the Northern Territory, and Pimpala, Adelaide, serving South Australia and Western Victoria. Senator, these sites were chosen based on previous natural disasters and ease of access to the region, as well as the ability to service and store these units between events. As at the 31st of December 2024, 124 projects have been completed over those 98 sites, and these upgrades, when completed, will impact a population of more than 800,000 residents in regional and remote areas across Australia. As at January 2025, the program has already ensured over 4,500 hours of additional content making it to air. For example, in October 2024, a major storm with high-speed winds and large hail damaged critical infrastructure, leaving Broken Hill and surrounding communities without power. The BRP upgrade provided an additional 56 total hours of support for the Menindee community and also 60 total hours for Wilcannia.
Thank you. So you said 4,500 additional hours of broadcast, so that's, that would not have been possible without this new infrastructure.
That's correct, Senator.
That's fantastic. And you talked about the 5 mobile power supply areas. Can the mobile broadcasting assets be deployed to any location?
So, Senator, it's those locations that I mentioned. They've sort of around the country, those 5 locations will ensure that they can be moved around to various locations, yes. Yeah.
And is the government considering an extension of this program, do you know?
Senator, that was a matter for government in terms of this program is due to be completed by April this year, and any extension is a matter for government.
Thank you. And what, if anything, did the coalition government do to support the resilience of broadcast infrastructure?
Senator, the BRP is a program that was established by this government as part of its Better Connectivity Plan to improve mobile coverage and increase the resilience of communication services, and this was funded in the October 2022 budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cadell.
Reading in the papers, and the Minister, I've just got a copy of the release now, issued an announcement regarding the universal outdoor mobile obligation. Yep. I'm trying to get up to speed to it as quickly as I can as I read through it. Obvious thing, it says that will require mobile carriers to provide access to mobile voice and SMS almost everywhere across Australia. Almost. What is there a definition of? I imagine if this is Leo's, then it's everywhere. Is he almost just a get out of jail free card?
So, Senator Kell, thanks for the question, and I will ask the officials to talk through the technical detail that you've requested. But I think it is worth making the point that this is a very significant reform from a telco perspective. So I think Australians will know that it's, you know, there's long been a universal service obligation in relation to terrestrial services. that needed to be brought up to date. Telecommunications technology has changed enormously. The government has done a very significant amount of work, and Minister Rowland, as you've noted, is wanting to progress this because of the significance of these issues for Australians, particularly in remote and regional communities. I'd make the point also, just in terms of my other obligations as Emergency Management Minister, that it's a really significant decision in terms of ensuring connectivity in a much broader range of places and circumstances, and providing a very significant degree of resilience in emergency situations as well. But I will ask Mr Chisholm to directly address your question.
Yeah, and thank you, Senator, for the question. It is, as the Minister said, a very exciting development in the government signalling to the market that it is prepared to support the deployment of new satellite technology to achieve much greater coverage and support across a country such as Australia. As you know, at the moment, as part of the fixed system we have, it's only about 30% of the landmass that's covered. The large phased array effect of LEOSAT's technology means that we can achieve much more coverage in support of things like universal service obligations, but also broader connectivity. One of the really interesting examples of how we saw this deployed recently was during the Los Angeles fires, and the role that Starlink played with T-Mobile to ensure that a large number of people were able to communicate with each other and with emergency services professionals in a way that they wouldn't have been able to with the existing system. So the universal outdoor mobile obligation will be a very significant signal to the market that the government is supporting that technology. We want to see that market develop. We'll work closely with industry to achieve that outcome. And on the question of the actual numbers and the coverage, I'll ask the officials to step through that. But we're really delighted to finally see this one announced.
Lisa Lorenz, First Assistant Secretary, Communications Infrastructure Division. The almost bit relates to you still need to be able to essentially see the sky. Yeah. So if you're inside a building, cave. But if you go out to the front of the cave, you should be able to get the coverage in places like out in national parks, or, as Mr Chisholm said, the vast areas of Australia where you're currently in between mobile phone towers.
So it doesn't need to be mapped because it's everywhere where you can see the sky. Is that right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
It doesn't need to be mapped because it's everywhere you can see the sky?
That's right.
Okay.
Essentially.
With the previous USOs, a lot of it on mobile coverage was to make sure telcos fix the towers that go out quickly and have this. Is that going to be wound back at all? Because unintended consequences of 3G have been there. There's no intent to wind back that regard?
No.
Okay.
It supports, there's definitely a role for both in the Australian landscape. And, for example, the LEOSATs, the services available to it will grow over time. So to start with, it's SMS, then voice, then data. So it will really bridge that gap where you don't currently have connectivity.
Okay. Getting to that point, a telco that I spoke to this morning on this said there was no technical liaison or consultation with them until last week on how this would happen. So what did the department do to... Great intent, there's no question here. What certainty do we have that a 2025 legislation, 2027 rollout is achievable?
Yeah, so Senator, we do work with industry on the broader series of policy questions related to the future of LEOSAT's technology. I chair a working group with industry and experts and government representatives on LEOSATs. We provided a report to government late 2023, and it highlighted a number of the areas for action for government and to which this relates, and also the R.T.R.C.A, the Regional Telecommunications Review report that was released just before Christmas, from memory. Yep. Pointed to this work as an important contribution to achieving the connectivity outcomes that Ms Lorenz stepped through. So we have had extensive consultation with communities through the R.T.R.C.A.
No, but
and industry as part of the LEOSAT's working group. One of the issues to be aware of in this context is that each of the telecommunications companies has their own commercial relationships, and it's therefore really important that we bear that in mind when we talk to them about future government announcements, because they need to think about that in the context of their own negotiations, for example, Optus with Starlink.
And Telstra with
and
Starlink.
So we will work closely with them as the policy is rolled out and implemented over the coming 18 months to 2 years.
Okay,
Yeah.
as it goes forward. But I imagine, you mentioned Starlink. They seem to be the only full coverage lowest LEOSATs at the moment. I imagine I might be putting word in Senator Hanson-Young's. She would be thrilled to have all the conversations carried over Elon Musk's network from that perspective. Are we driving, under this obligation, commercial realities of all our telcos to do business with one organisation at the moment? I know there's plans under NBN, there's been speaking about their own LEOs, but they won't be ready by 2027. Are we driving everyone into one organisation, one monopoly at the moment with this policy?
No, Senator. In fact, I'd say it's the opposite, because by the government signalling that it wants to see a universal outdoor mobile obligation, it's sending a strong signal to the market that it also wants to see competition and wants to see other entrants playing a role. There are European participants in the market. As you mentioned, there are other companies, both American and non-North American, that are emerging in the LEOSAT context. If the government didn't commit to a policy framework like this, we would likely see incumbents continue to do well, which is fine, but we also want to see new entrants, and hence the government is getting ahead of the curve in terms of the new technology, in a way that's something of a world first, I think.
Well, you say world first. You mentioned about direct-to-device technology. Has there been any live trials of direct-to-device technology in Australia?
We are doing trials. Yeah, would you like to? Yeah.
Sorry?
Not currently of direct-to-device. We are undertaking some independent LEOSAT-based voice trials currently, which has informed some of the universal mobile coverage work, but certainly there's a lot of experience internationally which we've been drawing.
But none in Australia. We have announced this in the press release today, that this is only possible thanks to LEOSAT and direct-to-device, but there are no trials to date of direct-to-device that have happened in Australia.
So can we, sorry Senator, Lisa Lawrence, if I can just add to that, there's the two different elements to the LEOSATs. LEOSATs are a newer technology. We do have the voice trials underway to understand how that's working in practice. As Mr Chisholm said, we do have a working group where we are working with providers and understanding the lived experience. We can talk more about the experience for the fires in the US.
And I looked at that. I want to know about the trials on technique because, as I said, good intent, but when industry's saying they only found out about this last week, when there's been no trials of the ability to deliver what is promised, it looks a little bit like Optus had made their own announcements, Telstra had made their own announcements. Are we just jumping on something without having a look? Has there been a feasibility study on the business case, for example, of when Mr Chisholm mentions there might be other players in LEOSATs? Do we have any reality that we'll have full coverage of a LEOSAT from any competitor to Starlink by 2027 when these comes in? Is that study been done?
So I think that the intention of announcing that we are bringing in the universal outdoor mobile obligation with sufficient time to be working with the mobile network operators on how it will work in practice. The government is also working with the sector to understand the technology, where it's up to, and to broaden the market. As you said, there is one player that is demonstrating in other locations that the technology works. This is about making sure that it's accessible to all Australians wherever you are.
Okay, but we haven't done the technical studies of one aspect of it. We haven't engaged with industry until last week on it, and we haven't done cost impacts of it.
Yeah.
So what's the announcement here? Something we'd like to see.
The announcement sends a very clear signal to the market that we want to see D2D services delivered in Australia. it's really important, whether you're talking about telecommunications or you're talking about energy or you're talking about other infrastructure, that you get very clear signals from government about what it wants to see, and that government is keen to support and work in partnership with the sector on that. And there are both broader incentives and the incentive underpinning this framework to encourage that. There are other entrants and competitors that are emerging in relation to D2D, including Link, which has an agreement in place with TPG and other companies such as AST Space Mobile. So that's really exciting, and the policy will send that clear signal, and we will be working closely with industry to deploy the technology in the future.
I get that, but
I need to rotate the
last
call.
question there,
Last
Chair.
question.
Given the Minister's recently raised some problems around sovereignty issues for LEOSATs here, and you can't name one LEOSAT business other than Starlink that will have full coverage by the time this USO comes in, what's going on here? Are we...
So Starlink is already providing services in Australia. Consumers have voted with their feet in relation to Starlink. That's had very significant uptake.
I'm a
it's
Starlink
very popular,
I don't have
including in regional communities and remote communities who rely on Starlink for connectivity. Starlink also played a really valuable role, as we highlighted, in the context of natural disasters in North America. We want to encourage all of the above. We're keen to see Starlink continue to play that role. We're also keen to see other competitors in the market. So, as I say, this is the government getting ahead of the curve and encouraging that competition and that innovation to the benefit of all Australians.
Well, I'm sure Senator Young will ask me questions about Trump. Maybe did President Trump phone up and say, give Elon all your business? So we'll hear if that's questions the next one.
Thank you, Senator Cadell. I might just have one quick follow-up before we go to Senator Hanson-Young. I was going to ask a series of questions, but Senator Cadell has covered most of them. I'm particularly interested in what advantage this will provide in natural disasters. I understand a similar technology was used in the LA fires. Could you just expand a little on that for us so we can see what the potential might be? Given, like, I know we've had a lot of challenges where we've had disasters, natural disasters in Australia where no one has any mobile coverage.
And just to preface it, and Miss Lawrence or Miss Power can speak to it at further length, but what you saw in LA with D2D is that it enabled people to communicate with each other who would have otherwise been disconnected during a natural disaster. So terrestrial services are frequently disrupted because of fires or other extreme events. And you saw T-Mobile, in partnership with Starlink, enable a D2D service for the greater Los Angeles area and for those devastating wildfires. The user experience during the disaster signalled that texts were made and received by standard unmodified 4G, LTE and 5G services. And then a week after the direct-to-device service was turned on in response to the fires, Starlink reported that over 120,000 texts had been sent and received. And on 16th of January, T-Mobile posted on their support page that around 96,000 texts had been sent and received since the service was turned on. So what you're seeing in these examples is that, but for the deployment of that technology, that's thousands and thousands of texts and communications that would not have happened, and then enable emergency services and family and loved ones to connect with people impacted by disasters. Hence, reinforcing the point that we've made this morning, that this sort of technology is vital for the future support to communities. Not only just improves connectivity generally, but during natural disasters and in countries like Australia, where we obviously look very closely at natural disasters in the US, we share similar climatic challenges and work in partnership with jurisdictions there. We're keen to see that technology work to full effect here as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And can you assure us that this won't end up as some form of Elon Musk monopoly?
So again, Senator, that's why the government is signalling that it wants to see a fully developed market underpinned by strong government policy and the obligation. We are seeing LEOSAT entrants continue to develop. I mentioned a couple of them earlier. companies like Amazon are also deploying that technology or building it. We are focused on ensuring support and connectivity for affected communities, whether it's Starlink or other competitors. That's really important for the government. And again, all good policy requires strong signals from government about how it wants to see markets developed and shaped. What we've seen in other contexts, including in the communications and media environment, I would say, Senator, is that you don't see optimal outcomes when you see government trying to catch up to the technology. When the technology takes off in ways that is more rapid than government has been on top of it, you see less beneficial outcomes. So this is a great example of the government getting ahead of the curve.
Okay, so this is a signal for people to come on down.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And in law, it'll be a legislated requirement, which is the strongest signal you can get.
Thank you. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Just continuing on this announcement today, could I just understand, or could you help me please understand how the incentive money will flow in terms of if a provider, Telstra or Optus, how much money is from the Australian taxpayers being spent on making sure these universal services are delivered?
Yeah, so we can talk about current funding for universal service obligations. So I might ask...
in terms of outdoor, we're talking about outdoor.
I'll just ask Ms Power to speak to current funding arrangements, and then we can step through the future plans for universal outdoor.
Hello, Nicole Power, Assistant Secretary, Universal Services Branch. So the current arrangements that apply to universal services don't include mobile services, so there is currently no funding being applied to it. Current arrangements are with Telstra currently, who is the designated universal service provider, but it has an obligation only to provide landline services and also payphones. So they receive funding under a contract with the Australian Government currently of $270 million per year for those two levels of services.
270 million?
Yes, that's correct.
So 230 for landlines and 40 million for the payphones?
That's correct.
Okay, we're operating on the same figures, that's good. So what will be the money put aside for this new expanded outdoor incentive?
Senator, those details will be worked through with government and industry.
What would you expect this to cost?
We're not going to get into that now.
Hang on, what? So the government's announced that they're going to do something, but they haven't said how much it's going to cost or how they're going...
Senator, that's a matter for future budget consideration by the government. The policy is set and it will be funded and supported as appropriate.
Have you done any cost analysis as to how much this would cost to get this done properly?
We've done some analysis to support the policy, and we monitor both the technology and the likely costs of the technology.
What would the likely cost be?
So, Senator, just to provide a bit of broader context, as the government goes about supporting this work, we will want to ensure that we are communicating with industry in a way whereby we're also focusing on best value for money for the taxpayer. Hence, I think those details will be considered by government at the appropriate time.
So if payphones cost the Australian taxpayer, if the payphone obligation incentive costs the Australian taxpayer $40 million, how much should we be expecting the Australian taxpayer to fund so that people can use Elon Musk's Starlink?
So, Senator...
That mischaracterises the policy.
Well, unless you tell me, Minister,
Senator,
you've made an announcement without any figures.
Order.
May I finish an answer?
Minister, please finish your answer.
Senator, your question misunderstands the advice that's been provided into the committee so far, which is that the government's purpose is to ensure that we do have a fully developed market, and that is the purpose of the announcement, is to signal very clearly the government's intention to develop this market and to work with industry to ensure that it is fleshed out. So to the extent that your question asserts that the government policy is intended to support monopoly provision, that is simply incorrect and in fact is the exact opposite of the policy intent of the initiative that's been announced.
Okay. How do you provide a signal without providing a funding figure? Who's going to? I mean, if this is about sending a signal to the market, surely you need to tell the market what type of money is on the table.
Well, Senator, I think...
Or you just think people just make it up?
Sorry, Senator, did you want me to answer the question or not?
Well, if you have the answer, Minister, otherwise perhaps the Deputy Secretary.
I think what's been made very clear is that the government wants a policy intent to ensure that we catch up universal service obligations to match the current technology in communications. This is an area that was sorely neglected during the previous government. Nothing happened. Considerable work has been undertaken, and we've canvassed this at this estimates previously to work around the emerging technologies in LEOSAT, and Mr Chisholm has already referred you to the working group that he is involved in. There has also, of course, been a review of regional communications, which we've worked with consumers to understand their requirements. This is the next step in this process. It's making it clear our expectations about the shape of the market going forward and the fact that there will be a role for government in shaping it. And Mr Chisholm can talk to you about how we now intend to work with industry to implement that, but it's really important that we do send this signal to industry. Well, there is a role for government.
I'm not discounting that,
right?
But I think unless you give some indication as to how much it's going to cost, the only player in the game is Elon Musk.
Well, Senator, I think you misunderstand again the evidence that's before you, which is that the policy intent is to ensure that we are bringing all of the players to the table.
Yeah. With an imaginary amount of money.
That's your assertion, Senator.
Well, you've made an announcement. You're saying this sends a strong signal, but there's no dollar figure attached and you won't tell us. So either you have the dollar figure and you're hiding it, right? Or you haven't got it and you haven't done your homework.
Neither of those things
Which one
are correct characterisations of what is happening.
Order. Senator Hanson-Young. Maybe ask questions.
Well,
berating the witnesses in this manner
is not
going to bode well for the day.
Could I ask whether there's been any sovereign risk analysis done by the department in relation to this announcement?
What do you mean by sovereign risk?
Well, thinking about if Starlink is the only company, US owned, what does that mean if somebody, Elon Musk, somebody else, I don't know, decides that that's not a service to be offered to Australia?
So, Senator, we've done quite extensive analysis of the market, and we work with industry, including through avenues such as the working group, on market development. LEOSAT technology, including Starlink, plays a really important role in that context, and we welcome Starlink's participation in this technology and in these markets, and we also welcome other entrants, which is why the policy is sending that clear signal. And it's important to bear in mind this is part of a broader suite of universal services reforms that the government is committed to, and that is all being considered in that context. So we are focused on the technology and its benefits, and that's where the policy's heading.
Just for clarity's sake, what's the name of the working group?
It's the LEOSAT's working group. I think it's literally that.
And is there a list of people on that working group that we can have tabled?
Yes.
That would be helpful. I don't need it now, but if you could table it, that would be helpful. Thank you. Could I ask whether there's been any analysis or risk report done in relation to possible foreign interference in relation to this technology?
I think those questions are probably a matter for Home Affairs.
No. This is a matter for your minister and your department. Before making this announcement, before deciding on this policy, was there a foreign interference risk assessment?
Again, Senator, I think questions that relate to what you're asking are dealt with in other portfolios.
Do you know whether the minister has sought advice from the Home Affairs Department in relation to this policy?
The policy was part of Cabinet consideration.
Do you know whether ASIO, ASIS or ASD were asked for their advice or assistance in relation to working out the impacts and risks of foreign interference with this technology and this announcement?
So again, Senator, the policy went through a Cabinet process and questions relating to intelligence and security are best directed to other portfolios.
Did you help design this announcement or policy, Mr Chisholm?
Yes.
So on the checklist of things to do, did anyone in your department say, we better go and ask ASIS whether there's any impact here, or can we flick this over to Home Affairs for them to have a look at, or was it announced in isolation?
So, Senator, we talk about this in estimates frequently. The Cabinet process covers...
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the work that the department has done.
The policy went through an extensive Cabinet development process, and that includes consultation with all affected and relevant agencies.
So has your department had any interaction or discussion or briefing from anyone in Home Affairs?
We talk to Home Affairs frequently.
In relation to this issue?
We talk to Home Affairs in relation to LEOSATs. We talk to them in relation to cyber risks. We talk to them in relation to critical infrastructure security, but they are Home Affairs portfolio responsibilities.
But you've developed this policy. Was it on somebody's checklist in your department to see if there was a foreign interference risk?
Senator, I think that the official has answered your question. He has indicated to you that this was the subject of the ordinary processes of Cabinet, and that in and of itself, by its nature, involves consultation with other agencies.
Were there any red flags raised?
Well, we don't go to the nature of discussions of Cabinet, and you know that.
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the departmental development of this policy.
Senator, I'm not going into...
surely that was done before it went to Cabinet.
We're not going to Cabinet deliberations of the policy.
I'm not asking about Cabinet. I'm asking about the work that your department has done on this particular project.
I wonder if we will rotate the call because we are up in terms of time. Mr Chisholm, if you have any further information, perhaps you could provide it on notice in terms of what engagement you've had regarding this particular program. We'll go to Senator Davey.
Thank you. And, I mean, on the surface, someone who lives downtown Conago by the Conago International Airport, I would normally be very excited about an announcement like this, but given it's uncosted, unplanned, unfunded, and there are so many questions, forgive me for being cynical. You know, we were promised that NBN would make internet access equivalent right around Australia, yet people in regional areas are paying up to 3 times more than their urban counterparts just to access speeds that are not equivalent.
I take a bit of responsibility for that one.
The NBN was a Labor government policy, Chair.
10 years of you lot, and look what happened.
No.
Chair.
It was
Please,
us
Senator
who
Davey,
actually realised the
continue
NBN
your
needed
questions.
to get to the regions. But anyway, just coming back to Senator Hanson-Young's questions about sovereign risk, in the 2024 Regional Telecommunications Review, which was headed up by former Labor MP Alana McTiernan, who did a good job, that report flagged that LEOSAT constellations are owned and operated by foreign companies, quote, raising questions about data security and control over sovereign risks. So she's flagged in a report that's publicly available potential sovereign risks of LEOSAT. She also went on ABC Radio on January 14th and said, it does, quote, it does obviously raise issues of sovereign risk when the proprietor is a person that is seeking to have major political power around the world. Yet you've got this announcement today, and I thought Senator Hanson-Young's question was quite reasonable. Were these issues that were raised in the Regional Telecommunications Review flagged at all prior to this announcement?
Thanks for the question, Senator Davey. It had a long preamble, and I will make the point that this government is actually acting to deal with the problems we inherited in relation to the NBN. And I agree with you that communities were let down by the previous government's approach to the NBN. Their completely failed reliance on a multi-technology mix, on the old copper network, was a catastrophe. And we are making very substantial investments to resolve that and to make sure that the promise of the NBN is actually fulfilled, because it was handled incredibly badly by the previous Liberal and National government.
We inherited an NBN. We inherited an NBN solely focused on delivering for urban areas. So,
well, Senator
we are now talking about,
I think,
let's just have a little bit of order. Senator Davey, you've asked a question, let the Minister answer.
I was asking about sovereign risk.
Well, Senator Davey, I'm just addressing all of the matters that you raised in your question, the first of which was the NBN. The second one, you did ask about sovereign risk, and again, as I indicated to Senator Hanson-Young, I think you are perhaps not yet grappling with the information that officials are putting in front of you, which is that the purpose of the announcement today and the work that the government is doing on universal service obligations more generally is to make sure that we have the policies in place to support the development of this market. Now, Mr Chisholm can talk to you about a number of things. I think it may be helpful if he does talk to you about the market information that we do have about current and likely participants in this market. But it's also the case that this is the beginning of working with industry, as he's already signalled to you, to understand how we will ensure that this market is fleshed out appropriately. Mr Chisholm.
Thank you, Minister. And
can I just clarify, though, Minister, you said the announcement of the policy was to send a signal, and yet in the reports about the policy, it says the intent is to introduce new laws. So it's not just a signal, it's legislation that will require telcos to offer LEO-SAT solutions.
Senator, the legislation is important because it provides a very clear incentive to see the technology deployed in support of the connectivity issues that we outlined at length before. So legislation will play an important role. It's probably the best way you can provide certainty to a market is to legislate it, because it's law and it needs to be provided. The government has also signalled that it will be prepared to partner with industry to see that technology rolled out, whether that's financial or in addressing other regulatory or related barriers, which goes to the work of the working group. The report that we provided to government a year ago goes into some detail about a range of regulatory and related issues that need to be tackled to help support LEO-SAT deployment. But again, no one thinks that this will not be a really critical piece of the technology solution for the future, particularly in relation to natural disasters, but also broadening connectivity in areas that are currently underserved. So there are other, as the Minister said, there are other entrants into the market. We are really keen to see them encouraged and to grow, both in Australia and with our partners, and the policy is focused on that.
Now, you've mentioned natural disasters. Senator Grogan mentioned natural disasters. It's a very crucial topic, and as Senator McAllister, the Minister, is very, very well aware. Crucial. We have been talking about the need for a public safety mobile broadband network for around 9 years. The Coalition provided funding for it. This government has continued funding for it. There is a task force working on it. My understanding when I get briefings on it is one of the roadblocks is there is no single-use technology yet. Will this universal outdoor mobile obligation negate the need for a public safety mobile broadband network, given you are saying that it will play an important role in natural disasters, and yet there is no single-use technology available?
I'll ask Ms Lawrence to speak to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Senator. Can I just clarify that LEOs aren't intended, so LEOSATs aren't intended to replace existing technology, including mobile infrastructure. It's supplementing it.
Yes.
It is also supplementing the other initiatives that are underway to strengthen Australia's capacity to communicate in times of disaster and emergency, and more broadly.
So can I also understand, as a regional customer, and who will bear the cost? It's uncosted. You say you'll partner with industry. You don't know what the incentives to industry will look like, whether it will be a financial incentive or an in-kind or a like incentive. As a regional customer who is more likely to be dependent on LEOSATs or LEOSAT facilitated communications than someone who lives in Sydney with a 5G antenna on every street corner, am I going to be paying more for the privilege of that service in the regions because there'll be an extra cost every time you connect to a satellite? I mean, this is the sort of questions that people out there will be asking that I don't, from your answers today, I'm getting the feeling that there's no work been done on that yet.
So, Senator, that is part... So, firstly, as Mr Chisholm said, this is part of a broader review of the universal service obligations. There are 2 discussion papers which are up on our website. One is looking at the financing arrangements that sit around USO reform, and looking at the mobile element. We're looking at those structures more broadly, flagging that the government is willing to incentivise where necessary, and having some runway between now and when this will come into effect. It is about working with industry. Industry currently covers a lot of the costs for the commercial benefit, I guess, commercial interaction. This is about understanding if there are barriers to entry, going to Senator Hanson-Young's point about having a market that involves more than one player, and then being able to address those barriers. So it's first understanding what the barriers to entry are, and there is already funding that is dedicated to universal service obligations. It's about whether we are structuring that in the way that meets the needs of people.
And we keep hearing that there are more than one players. We've all heard about Starlink. Can you give me the names of other potential players? The name of one other LEOSAT provider that might or might not participate?
So we're monitoring the market closely, Senator. There are competitors, including Link, LYNK. It has an agreement with TPG and other companies such as AST Space Mobile, and they've trialled D.I.T.R.D.C.A capability. I referenced earlier Amazon's Kuiper project, which is in development now as well. But I'll ask the team if they wish to speak further on that.
Mr Chisholm, I think that you've covered all the main players. Obviously, there's Apple iPhone uses Globalstar LEOSAT constellations to make emergency SMS. So there definitely are alternative players emerging in the market.
We expect to continue to see more of that, given just how successful the technology has been. Starlink is obviously at the forefront of the market at this time, but the market is developing really quickly, and I expect to see more of that over time. Which
does beg the question. Telstra have made an announcement that they're trialling this sort of technology, as has Optus. So why is the government intervening in what the market is doing anyway?
We want to see an orderly transition of this technology to support consumers and as part of the Universal Services reform framework. I mean, this is about as critical to the role of government in telecommunications as you can get. The Commonwealth is responsible for communications. For the Commonwealth to just sit back and allow all this to happen without clear signals, regulation, commitments to work with industry, I anticipate we would see very messy transitions taking place. And we would also see likely a single player dominate the market. That is why we want a strong policy framework in place to encourage the new entrants, the competition, the market development, and a focus on keeping it in the context of universal services.
So you want to prevent a single player?
Last question, sir.
We want to see a strong market develop.
So last question. We saw with the closure of 3G, people all around the country having to upgrade their devices. Will that be the case? And particularly if I've got an Apple which uses Global Star, but the LEO sats might not be Global Star, or are people going to be obliged to upgrade to access this universal mobiles, or is it going to be streamlined? Because again, the concern is what the cost will be to the end consumer, and you've not been able to enunciate that at all. If Telstra and Optus are forced down this path, will they pass on the cost to their consumers, and will consumers have to go out and buy new phones?
So it is really important, as you say, Senator, for people to know which devices are able to access D2D services. So we will work closely with AUSParliament to ensure there's clear information on that. We're also...
but the answer is potentially.
We're also involved in a funding device testing processes, and that is work that AUSParliament is involved in to get a better sense of the device capability. But over time, as mobile phones continue to be developed and roll out, we're going to see greater use of this technology. So, but yes, as with 3G, and I might add, 3G was, when we commenced that process, well, certainly when Minister Rowland inherited responsibility for that process, there was not an orderly transition process in place. New regulations have been put in place to mandate 000 compliance for mobile phones. A device testing regime has been put in place to work with industry and with manufacturers because we want to see...
Senator, we're going to rotate you.
Because we want to see that orderly transition happen, and hence that's the same with these technologies, which is that government has a critical role to play.
Which actually makes the case for the framework that's been announced. We actually do need a measure of coordination across all of the elements of the supply chain in the context of the universal service obligation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to go to some of those other questions that I referenced earlier this morning. First of all, just picking up, Mr. Betts, you said that the policy isn't decided by other countries' administration. The government and the minister put on ice the streaming quotas on the quotas on streaming services, specifically because of the US election. So it does seem that there is at least some consideration about the change of administration in the US. Since then, of course, we've heard nothing about regulating streaming services. Where is that up to? And when are we going to get some movement on it, or has it actually been dumped as a government policy? And that's perhaps a question for the Minister.
Perhaps I can start. So we have a proud screen sector, and we're really proud of the work that our filmmakers do, and I observe that they are acknowledged globally for their excellence. And we are committed to introducing Australian content requirements on streaming services to ensure that we have local content and stories. I have already said this morning, and I've said on other occasions, that this is taking longer than we would like. I don't accept your characterisation of the government's posture towards this. We are progressing this, but it is necessary to get it right, and we are engaged in consultations to make sure that that occurs. And I can ask Mr Betts or Dr Arnott to talk you through any of the more particular
I'm specifically, so last time we were here, the Minister had just briefed the sector saying they weren't going to be moving ahead before the election, the US election. US elections happen now, so where are we?
Well, again, Senator, that is... the government was clear at the time that we were working through the issues across a whole range of issues. We're also clear that it wasn't moving as quickly as we would like. However, we remain committed to the policy, and I can ask the officials to speak with you about the work that's underway.
I don't think we have a whole lot to add to that, in addition to the points that Dr Arnott made earlier this morning.
So is this one of the issues that the Treasurer is discussing this week in the US?
You'd have to direct those questions to Treasury.
No, I'm asking from... this is your department. It is your policy.
Well,
it's your government's policy. The Treasurer is overseas discussing, in the US, discussing trade issues, we understand. Is the issue of Australian content on Netflix and Disney part of that conversation or not?
I've already indicated you need to direct those questions to Treasury. We're not in a position to brief on the Treasurer's movements or the Treasurer's itinerary.
Has this department briefed Treasury officials about the policy and where it's going?
So the policy is subject to the normal cabinet processes, which you
God, are we going to get this all day?
Well, this is the way government works, Senator.
No, departments advise and departments should answer.
You've asked the question, allow the official to provide the answer.
So major decisions, including decisions which prospectively involve legislation, which prospectively involve significant levels of public consultation, which have been underway for some time, are routinely discussed around the cabinet table and through cabinet committees. And in supporting those committees, there are official level forums where departments exchange information and discuss ideas and analysis. And the AUSParliamentLive regulation that you're referring to has been subject to those processes over a considerable period of time, as we've described.
Is the top, Dr Arnott, is the topic of streaming services and regulation being discussed in the US this week by Australian officials? Are you aware?
I've provided an answer to that question, Senator.
Sorry, I just directed a question to Dr Arnott as to whether he was aware. Surely Senator, he can answer whether he is aware or not.
Senator, for a start...
You're running cover.
Any question may be taken by the Minister, but I've indicated to you that for obvious reasons the department is not in a position to provide answers around the Treasurer's movements or the Treasurer's itinerary. Those really do need to be directed to the Treasury.
So your government's doing nothing on this?
That's inaccurate, Senator.
Well, you haven't... You have given... no.
I'll ask you to stop shouting.
Last estimates, we were told nothing was going to happen until after the US election. The US election has happened. So what is happening now? What is your government doing? What are your officials doing? When are we going to see a delivery of the promise that was made to the Australian people and to the industry?
Senator, I'll review the transcript, but I don't think that accurately describes the information that was provided to you at the last estimates. I've given you an answer about the government's continuing commitment to this. I've indicated to you that the work is ongoing.
What does ongoing mean, please, Minister? I mean, I would like to know what work is being done. If nothing has moved, fine, say that. But saying ongoing is not a fulsome answer in a Senate estimates, with all due respect.
Well, Senator, Mr Betts has just described to you the fact that this matter is being progressed through the ordinary processes of government, that there is work occurring between agencies.
I'd like to know what work. This is what I'm trying to understand. Well, this is just bureaucratic doublespeak.
Senator, you've asked whether the government is committed to this. I'm telling you that we are, but the work hasn't concluded yet. I've also said to you that that is slower than we would have hoped.
Have you sent officials to the US to discuss this topic since the election?
No, Senator.
Has there been any conversation with the ambassador to the US in relation to this issue since the election?
That's clearly a matter for Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Mm-hmm. Has there been any briefings and work done with the Department of Foreign Affairs in relation to this topic by your department?
I've described to you the normal process.
No, I'm talking specifically about this issue.
There are forums which sit under the architecture of Cabinet through which these matters are routinely discussed, including with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Can we have a list of meetings, please, on notice, unless you can give it to us now, of when this department, Dr. Arnott or others involved in this, have spoken to members of the Foreign Affairs Department around this issue, on this issue, about continuing to deal with this issue since the US election?
We'll provide you what we can on notice, recognising that some of those discussions take place in Cabinet.
I understand that. I'm not asking for Cabinet deliberations. I'm asking for the
Thanks for that clarification, because you won't get them. So we'll give you what we can.
When does the government, Minister, expect that we will see legislation for this regulation as promised? We're 3 years down the track almost.
Senator, I can't provide you with any more information than I've had. This work is ongoing. It has not concluded. The government remains committed to progressing it.
News Media Bargaining Code. What is the expected time frame that these consultations will be completed, the new system?
Senator, are you asking about the News Media Bargaining Code or the News Media Bargaining Incentive announcement from the government?
I'm talking about how your government is going to take this issue forward. You've made some promises. You've got the incentive.
Yep. So the incentive is...
Remembering, of course, that a number of the contracts have already expired.
Yes, so Senator, the incentive is a Treasury portfolio matter, both the code and the incentive. So best direct questions to Treasury in another committee.
Is there anyone in your department who's working on this, Mr Chisholm?
Well, we have an interest in the incentive in the context of the broader suite of Newsmap reforms that the government is rolling out. Both the Newsmap policy framework and the financial commitments the government's made to support regional media, media sustainability and diversity,
of course, the Minister was part of the announcement.
SBS and First Nations and cold communities. So obviously we have an interest in the broader question of media diversity and sustainability, but the incentive itself is Treasury.
Yes, so the Minister is involved. This isn't being done purely by the Treasurer or the Assistant Treasurer. The Minister for Communications is involved. She was there at the announcement.
Yep.
There's a press release with her name on it.
Yep. As I say, we have a strong interest in it, but it's It's Treasury who leads on the policy.
Who in your department works on this? Is working on this issue?
I work on this issue. Ms Gannon works on this issue.
Could we have a list of the officials who are working on this issue from the department, please?
A list of all officials working on this?
On News Media Bargaining Code and the incentive, I'd like a list of the officials from your department who are working on this issue.
I think we can take that on notice.
Yeah, we'll take it on notice.
Do you know how many there are?
Well, Senator, there is a task force in Ms Gannon's division focused on news and journalism. It is primarily focused at the moment on the Newsmap policy framework and programs of support underpinning that. There's also a branch in Ms Gannon's division that supports the national broadcasters, which are a critical part of what we're doing with Newsmap as well, and there is a media reform team that supports that work. So we've got a number of people working on news and media diversity and media reform. The incentive, we do communicate with Treasury in relation to that, but as I say, it's not something that falls squarely into any.
But there must be somebody in your department or people within your department whose responsibility it is to be working with Treasury.
Yes. And I've told you that's both myself and Ms Gannon.
And nobody else?
There are of course, there are other people working on it, but we'll take on notice the names. You've asked for a list of names.
And the positions.
And positions, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, Senator Hanson-Young, we will take that on notice and do what we can. It's not common to provide the names of
I'll tell you why I'm asking
personnel, Senator Hanson-Young. So we'll examine the request and see when information can be provided.
I'm not going to waste time then. You examine, you consider my request and get back to me. Mr Chisholm, has there been any briefing with Treasury or any other department within government in relation to the impact of the new US administration and the comments made publicly by the President or indeed Elon Musk in relation to News Media Bargaining Code or the incentive or indeed any other part of your government's, your department's policies?
Okay, so Senator, I'm not aware of specific comments about the code. We are aware of the President's executive order in relation to digital policies, and we will continue to engage with the administration, with industry to ensure that our respective digital policies are meeting our objectives. And the relationship itself, however, with the US is handled by the Department of Foreign Affairs.
Who's in charge of looking at that particular executive order on digital policies and the impact it has on Australian domestic policies and regulations?
It's a fairly, from memory, Senator, and again, we don't have primary responsibility for interpreting executive orders. We would seek the support of D.I.T.R.D.C.A and Treasury on that matter. From memory, and I don't have a copy of it in front of me, it's pretty broad in terms of trade relationships and trade impacts. So again, sorry, Senator, I was just going to finish and say that that's why we're relying on D.I.T.R.D.C.A to help understand that.
Has there been an official cross-departmental or internal departmental briefing on the order and what the implications?
Not that I'm aware of.
So what is the level, I guess what I'm trying to understand is what is the level of engagement of this department since this executive order has been handed down?
I think it was handed down.
With whom, Senator Hanson-Young? Do you mean engagement with other people, or what is your question?
Well, I've just asked externally with other departments and also internally. What I'm trying to understand is, did you just all email it around to each other? Or did you have a meeting? Have you worked out a way forward? Is there a task force charged to look at how this will impact the rollout of a number of your department's policies?
So, Senator, I think we became aware of it over the weekend. It's now Tuesday. I anticipate there will be work in relation to that, which D.I.T.R.D.C.A is leading and coordinating on behalf of the whole of government.
Okay, so there's been no memo or anything internally to the department as of today?
No memos. D.I.T.R.D.C.A is probably working on advice, and we are in regular contact with D.I.T.R.D.C.A about our policies, given how much they relate to international companies, and we
has there been any? Has there been any?
We are going to have to.
What I'm trying to.
You're well over
the executive order was signed on the weekend. Did anyone in your department contact anybody else in the department or D.I.T.R.D.C.A and say, we need to get across this?
Yeah, so we read the executive order. We're aware of it. D.I.T.R.D.C.A is aware of it. Work will be done in relation to that as part of the bilateral relationship, and that is D.I.T.R.D.C.'s responsibility.
Thank you.
Senator Billick.
Oh, thank you. Just in regard to the regional communications funding programs, I was wondering if you could detail where the current key programs are at in terms of delivery.
Sorry, I coughed it.
Sorry, Senator, would you mind repeating the last part of the question?
That was my fault.
Sorry, I just said I'm wondering if you could detail where the current key programs are at in terms of delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. I might ask Mr Grunhard to just kick off with that.
Thank you, Senator. Sam Grunhard, First Assistant Secretary, Communications Services and Consumer Division. So you'd be aware, Senator, the government committed, as part of the Better Connectivity Plan, in addition to significant funding for the NBN, the government committed $656 million to improve mobile and broadband connectivity and resilience in rural and regional Australia. Senator, I'm pleased to report that of that funding, the government has announced or awarded over $521 million across 14 separate initiatives, and that allocation is funding a pipeline of over 500 projects, delivering new and enhanced connectivity across regional, rural and remote Australia. Senator, there are a number of programs under that banner of the Better Connectivity Plan. You heard about one of them earlier this morning. That's the Broadcasting Resilience Program, which is achieving some really significant differences for the resilience and the continuity of ABC radio and television broadcasts. So that's one example. Another example is the Mobile Black Spot Program, which you'd be aware the 7th round has been contracted and is underway. And the 8th round of the Mobile Black Spot Program is currently accepting applications. There's also the Mobile Network Hardening Program, which is designed to ensure that mobile telephone towers continue to broadcast in the case of significant floods, fires and other interruptions. That has accepted applications for the 3rd round of that program, and we're presently assessing those. You'd be aware, for example, of the On-Farm Connectivity Program, which has had 2 successful rounds that were fully subscribed, and the Minister has announced a 3rd round of $20 million to roll out later this year. So there are other examples of programs underneath that umbrella, but that's a sample of some of what's underway, Senator.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to pull you up. Senator Billick, I know you only got a couple of minutes.
I did, sadly. Thank you.
Because we're going to break for morning tea and we will return at 10:45 and continue on with program 5.